Hello! Welcome back to this Phantasy Star 4 series, and hold on, Rune is going to easily destroy a barrier that Zio probably worked very hard on. Also with me is my younger brother, Stone of Triumph, and he has some things to say. He's done more research on Phantasy Star than I have. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a nerd, and I'm going to mention a couple of things you forgot the last video. Both the Phantarobe and the Psycho Wand are items from Phantasy Star 1.
Although I have an excuse for not recognizing the wand, because in the translation of Phantasy Star 1, it's just described as wand.
And in all caps, too, so it's WAND!
Wand! So we got a dungeon now, and we got technology, which is not really what one might expect from a second dive into Zio's fort, especially considering what we dealt with last time.
Well, I believe Seed did say that Zio built his fort right on top of Nervous.
Well, yes, but I still thought it would be mostly the sort of forces that Zio was using before. As for the content of the dungeon, well, we've seen some carryover from last dungeon because that was also Zio's forces. Funny how that works. But don't worry, we're going to see some new stuff like this. Now,
these are bombs.
These are bombs. They are definitely exploding things. But surprisingly enough, it's fairly safe to just hit them in melee with things. Don't ask me why.
Well, maybe they're like nuclear bombs in that they only explode when they're turned on.
They're already moving though, so they look turned on to me. Well, this place, in fact, everything about this section ties directly into Phantasy Star 2. We've already talked about how the environmental systems come from that point in the story, and the intro also mentioned Mother Brain, the computer that controlled most of society on Algo. People who play video games know that anything called Mother Brain is going to be evil.
However, Mother Brain was not really the chief antagonist of Phantasy Star 2, because the real antagonists were the people who built it, the Earthmen, and they are exactly who they sound like. They are the last survivors of the humans from Earth who came to colonize Algo and built a big computer to give everyone a cushy society and then visit gigantic disasters on them. And they also had a very nasty fellow traveler on their journey by the name of Dark Force.
And the game heavily implies that Dark Force is the thing that kind of encouraged the Earthmen to go to Algo.
However, the Earthmen are no longer a problem.
Well, alright, I'd like to add one or two details. They say outright that the Earthmen are looking to colonize Algo because Earth is a complete wasteland, and it's possible that the people on that Earth colony ship are the last surviving Earthlings. Now, that particular plot twist at the end caused a lot of, how shall I say, I don't think concern is the right word, aggravation, frustration, because the game does not actually tell you what happens at the end. It just shows the party getting attacked by a whole lot of Earthmen. They all get cool poses and say defiant things, and then the game ends. And what makes it even better is that the follow-up Phantasy Star game, Phantasy Star 3, was a side story and did not cover the events of Algo at all, so that still left things a mystery. And we didn't get any hint on what happened until this game, Phantasy Star 4.
And it was a long wait no matter what side of the Pacific you were on, because if you were Japanese you had to wait 4 years to figure it out, and if you were on the other side of the Pacific you had to wait 6.
Now 6 years might not be a long time from the perspective of people who are waiting for, say, Half-Life 3, but for just about anything else, it's a very long wait, and it was not certain that we would ever get an answer.
Yeah, because Phantasy Star 2 was quite a unique game as far as JRPGs go, and it kinda still is in some ways.
But I'd like to note that equipping Rune with 2 shields results in him actually being a very strong tank. I guarantee you that claw does not deal just 3 damage to most things. But back to this story. Even Phantasy Star 4, you've already seen all of the evidence that the game provides you as to how the ending went, which is to say, even now it is implied. However, I will say this. We have plenty of Parmans, we have Motavians, and later we'll see Dissolians, but there are no Earthmen.
Yep.
We don't know if the original party survived the battle, but the Earthmen definitely did not succeed. They were probably all killed, and this makes it very likely that humans from Earth are now extinct.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are familiar with what these people from Earth did in Phantasy Star 2, you know that they had it coming.
Well, plus it would be kind of out of character if Phantasy Star 2 didn't end with another calamity.
I mean, you can sort of get an idea if you're playing the Japanese version, because the name of that one was not Phantasy Star 2.
Yeah, the full title was Phantasy Star 2 End of the Golden Age or something like that.
Or The End of the Days That Will Never Return. And this title was actually put in a callback at the very end, where after the whole gritting teeth cutscene thing goes, it goes to Why Child the Planet, and text says, "I wonder what people will see at the end of the days that will never return," which makes it make a lot more sense than the English version, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Although, of course, that still doesn't say what happened, and we didn't get any clues until, as my brother said, 4 or 6 years later.
And if you had even known that Phantasy Star 4 had come out, if you're an English speaker.
Yeah, there was very, very little marketing. It was not easy to find in stores, and the price was enough to dissuade people, I think.
Okay, so how about, is a Phantasy Star game worth $100, is what we're asking.
That depends greatly on who you ask. I will say this. I do not blame the people who say no. There are many other games that you can get which you would enjoy and would cost a lot less than $100.
So, about these towers and float mines.
Well, yes, the tower summon float mines. I actually thought that if you let the tower summon float mines and then just let them all attack, they would do a combination attack. So I tried that and just sat around for a couple of rounds and nothing happened.
Well, you may have been thinking of a different enemy.
Yeah, that might be something later on. Also, I've already demonstrated Spark is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I used it in particular on the beefiest, most troublesome enemy robot, and it worked 100% of the time. This game kind of loves to throw very, very tricky enemies that you can just instant kill if you happen to remember you can do that.
Yeah, the only game that might be as good about it as this game is Breath of Fire 2.
Yeah, that worked a little bit differently because its magic defense system was a little bit simpler, which is if an enemy is weak against magic, then it's weak against death magic. And this dungeon kind of follows the general Phantasy Star 4 philosophy of dungeons in that it looks like a maze at first glance, but it doesn't take very long at all to figure out what's what. It doesn't take you down very, very long side paths.
Correct. The side paths to treasure in most dungeons anyway is not particularly long, and you want to get treasure in dungeons.
Yeah, in fact, if you're looking closely at my pathing during this whole thing, there'll be 1 or 2 times where I move forward, realize, oh wait, this is the actual way forward, and back up. Which is, I think, a universal thing in most role-playing games like this.
Most games that involve exploration, because I've been dealing with that in Blaster Master.
Oh yeah, right. You got... let's see. Was it Blaster Master Zero?
Yes. Yeah, they turned that into a real Metroid.
You see, this is one of those moments right there. Oh wait, that's the
Progress? That's not what I want.
That is the opposite of what I want. Now, let's see, I think I'm just about out of story things to say for now, because there will definitely be more coming up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a boss fight here.
So, about...
Take your time, I can answer any question about Phantasy Star.
Thank you, I'm sure you can. I already mentioned at the end of the last video that Rune had definitely lost loved ones often enough that he knew not to even bother to try to sleep the night afterwards.
Correct.
But was there anything else about that particular scene that stuck out for you?
Well, more like Chaz is actually capable of putting two and two together when it comes to the feelings of his fellow party members.
Oh, right. He happens to suffer very little from the usual hot-blooded hero problem.
Correct.
Now, when I realized that that was the level when Rika learned Shift, I was rather dismayed, because I was really hoping she was going to learn SAR, which is the party-wide healing technique, and I knew that I was close to the end of this dungeon.
Well, good luck.
Good luck to me.
Don't worry, speedrunners can do it. I'm sure you can.
Oh, well, we're gonna talk about speedrunners. Don't you worry.
Oh yeah, you are pretty close to the end.
Yep. And I love these sort of side views of the dungeons, even though that one was fairly bare bones. We got a Plasma Claw. That seems very hazardous to use. One thing that I'm doing here that I did not do in previous playthroughs is to just go back, you better go back, and take a look at the description of things that I equip. Because I didn't do that early, I just took a look at the stats and forgot about it. That is some very impressive technology.
Well, the entire point of Rika is that she was built tough.
That is true. That is a fairly large part of it. And I wanted to show off just how annoying these guys were under the right circumstances. So far you've seen them use like Foy and Watt, but these particular palette swaps can, well, you'll see.
Oh, I know what you're going to show.
They do that.
They have it and you don't. Good luck.
Once again, much easier if you remember you have instant death attacks. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also why it's very helpful to know what instant death effects are effective against what kinds of enemies. I've already talked about why Crash is great against those guys.
You have. Because strength matters.
And I can't think off the top of my head of too many other contemporary games where you had to target your instant death attacks carefully like that. Like this one targets the enemy's strength, and this instant death targets their intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's just all magic, and whether their death resist was a thing or not.
Correct.
In that way, it feels a little bit like D&D in targeting their saves.
Okay.
We got Zio, and my brother has a story to tell.
Okay, so there are a couple of things in the production of Phantasy Star 4 that didn't make it into the final game, and I'm going to talk about the ones concerning Zio. First off, Originally, Zio was supposed to be physically corrupted as well as mentally corrupted, so under that armor and suit, he's pretty grody apart from his face. The second thing is that there's a bit of backstory that was omitted and never made it into the game script, which was that Zio is a washout from the same place that Rune got his training. There's more to that story, but that's going to have to wait to become relevant. And the last thing is that he kinda dresses like one of the Earthmen.
I consider it Earth cosplay. And that's why you don't have to actually equip the Psycho Wand to be okay for this battle.
Yeah, the Psycho Wand is an item that removes buffs from enemies, and the magic barrier is just another buff.
Yeah, and when my brother said washout, he was serious. Like, there was a very good reason Alice talked about this guy as a charlatan. He was awful at what he did before he made contact with Dark Force. And you're going to find out from this battle that even with help from Dark Force, Rune is a much better wizard than Zio is.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the thing is, what speedrunners do is that they actually do have Rune fight Zio solo, and it's basically no contest.
Yeah, if you equip Rune with 2 shields, he will easily tank anything Zio can throw at him, and Zio cannot tank what Rune does.
Yeah, Rune will just blow him up.
Keeping a party alive, though? That's a different matter.
Yeah, that is the challenge.
Now, it partially depends on luck, because Zio has, I believe, 4 actions. 2 of them are single target. No, wait, 5. 3 of them are single target, 2 of them are multi-target. So if you get good luck on how much he does of what, it can be pretty easy even when you're using magic-averse characters.
Or you don't have SAR anyway.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is, with reasonable luck, you don't especially need SAR. I did not have reasonable luck.
Yeah, Zio basically sets the tone for pretty much all of the major bosses going forward.
Yeah.
They are going to hit you with all attacks and really nasty single attacks, and they will not stop for nothing.
Yeah, these are... And as I mentioned before, you don't get too many special boss mechanics. In this case, I guess it counted that you had to use the Psycho Wand at the start, but first of all, that's not what I would consider complex, and second, the story told you to do it about 5 times.
Just a few.
And it is times like this where Chaz's versatility can help a lot. I mentioned how I like to use his attack techs a lot more than his recovery ones. Well, there's times when that's not wise.
Mm-hmm.
Although, as my brother mentioned, if I had SAR, this wouldn't be a problem.
Oh yeah, one of the things I appreciate about Phantasy Star 4 in general is how well your character sprites are actually scaled to the enemy sprites.
Yes. There are definitely quite a few huge enemies, but that's very clearly the game showing that this is how it is to scale, not your characters coming to shoulder height to a goblin.
Yeah, well, that's due to display issues on how they had to line up all of your characters on one side of the screen, and while the enemy field was much larger.
And you're also starting to notice a problem with androids, which is there are going to be a lot of bosses that use magic attacks, party-wide or otherwise. Androids do not weather that very well, and they cannot be healed by party members.
Yeah, there's actually a bug with androids in this game, in that they're supposed to be resistant to normal physical attacks, but that only applies if the enemy gets a surprise round.
Well, today I learned. And here I thought that it's just that they got good armor, so they're supposed to have high physical defense, but no, it was supposed to be better than that.
Yeah, well, stats not working correctly is a Phantasy Star tradition, that this game just has much less of that than Phantasy Star 2.
But please explain a little bit more about some of Phantasy Star 2's offenses in that regard.
Well, for example, strength is actually meaningless.
Oh, well, that sounds like it could have been helpful. Oh, by the way, Githu, he is very weak to that. If I had realized it earlier, I would have used that instead of Crosscut. But conversely, that would mean that he might not have tech points for healing, and Rika is out, so I kinda need that.
Yeah, all of the Dark Force minions are weak to Chaz's special damage type.
And my resources are starting to look not so great.
No, that's normal.
Yeah, well, Chaz working alone as a healer is a little dodgy. But fortunately, it doesn't matter anymore.
Well, he's done for.
He sure is. This is not one of those bosses that comes back after several refights.
Well, that doesn't really happen
There it is! There it is! One level. I need... Oh well.
Well, you blowed him up.
But yeah, recurring bosses tend not... Driz is crying. That's actually... that's fine by me, character-wise. I don't blame him whatsoever.
Yeah, actually, until this game, Phantasy Star games didn't tend to have many bosses at all.
Yeah, so recurring bosses were doubly not a thing.
Phantasy Star 2 had, like, 3 bosses.
It also had its own specific boss music, but it was, as boss musics go, it was fairly odd. Like, for example, Laughter, the boss music we just encountered, is definitely boss music, and very well done music at that. But the boss music in Phantasy Star 2 was more like the title theme song remixed. It was hardly a battle song at all, if you listen to it without context.
Well, now little Beep Boop gets to plug in.
Yeah, what I find interesting is that in Phantasy Star 1, Motavia didn't need all of that extra help to be habitable, at least by the natives. So I'm wondering if that terraforming and then unterraforming did some long-term damage that they haven't solved yet.
Think of it like a rubber band.
And
plus, the systems themselves have been going haywire.
For a while, yeah, so who knows. Also, I'd like to mention that that kind of moment at the end of the Zio battle where I was almost out of everything, that made the game a lot more enjoyable for me to play than it was when I did all that grinding stuff that I mentioned before. Although I'm not sure I would have properly appreciated it back when I was first playing.
Yeah, I actually lowballed the next major boss after Zio, and that was pretty tense. But they're going to see why.
It makes me wonder if the people who say, oh, Phantasy Star 4 is easy, made the same mistake I did. I mean, it can be easy if you want it to be, and it's not bad to have the option. And, whoa, we got a spaceship, it's Phantasy Star, alright. And Grizz has done the thing that he set out to do, so I guess he's going home.
The writers have no more reason for me to be here. And, you know, dumping a character because of that is a good enough reason.
Yeah, that as well as they kinda set up his story so that him leaving right now doesn't break any immersion at all. And that's the end of the video, so thanks very much for watching.
See you then.